Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Latin America's deepest economic crisis on record has cut Venezuela's output by more than half and prompted an exodus of 3.4 million Venezuelans, more than 10% of the population in the past 3 years, according to the United Nations. Economists say more than 1/4 of Venezuelans, about 8 million people, now use the United States dollar for ordinary transactions because, get this, independent economists are estimating a 2 million% annual inflation rate of the Bolvar. So things aren't good in Venezuela, would be one way to put it. Or perhaps the only way to put it. Why do you care, though? I mean, what does this have to do with us in the United States of America? I'll give you two perspectives. There's the humanitarian perspective, right? We care because there's a bunch of people suffering, not of their own doing, and they clearly want something different. You could care from the let's spread the American idea of democracy. They elected a different leader than who's in charge right now. And the leader who shouldn't be in office is still running things. So you could care from that component. The last thing, if we're going to be a little more self-centered, is you would care because Russia's involved. And right now, based on how things are going in Venezuela, Russia's winning and we're losing. So you could care from that standpoint. But of course, we couldn't begin a critical conversation on Venezuela and foreign relations without
your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Sounds like three good reasons to want to get involved here, or at least make yourself aware of the situation. Rolling blackouts throughout the city and all kinds of problems. And, we could take the president's side of it here and say, oh my gosh, we're going to have more waves of people coming in from our border and all that kind of stuff. Or, hey, you could take care of the problem and then they'd stay home. People only leave if the issues are bad. So we'll get into it here and we'll see. But it sounds like a pretty big mess down there. It's just, remember when everybody was happy and it was like, hey, look at this young guy that's going to take over and there's marching in the street and things are going to be happening down here and there are going to be changes in Venezuela. And then the dictator stuck his feet in the ground and said, I'm not leaving. And as one lady was quoted in one of the articles said, the sitting government was much stronger than we realized.
The articles we're referencing today are from the Tuesday, March 26th Wall Street Journal. Immigrants are expected to send some $4 billion to relatives back home this year, up from $1.9 billion in 2018, economists say. An additional $1.5 billion will come from Venezuelans who withdrew money from their foreign bank accounts this year. That money's on track to surpass an expected $4.7 billion in net oil revenue this year. So what are all these numbers? The long and short, Lance, is that Venezuela is going to bring in $4.7 billion, and the amount being sent back from Venezuelans who aren't in the country now to people in Venezuela is going to exceed that amount.
Yep. That's what happens when the economy goes bad. People get up and leave if they have that opportunity. And then, it's an age-old remedy, to the situation. If I can't find a job where I'm living, we always say that about, I've heard people say that about people too. It's like, well, why are they living there if there's nothing good going on? Why don't they leave? Okay, well, in Venezuela, they're leaving.
Yeah, 10% of them have.
And, I'm sure mostly males, young males or males with families, and then they're sending the money back. And that they're trying to take care of the problem. With some intercession from the world community, maybe we could help them stand on their own 2 feet and those people could go back and be reunited with their families. But they're doing the best they can and obviously earning quite a bit of money. Or I shouldn't say, probably personally, they're not earning a lot of money, but when you have a tenth of your population leave your country over the last 3 years, something bad is going on. It's awfully hard to find livable wages and working and work in Venezuela.
Jackson, a Caracas security guard, so not your friendly redneck liberal, is paid in bolivars, and he says that a 12-hour workday for him is worth 3 pounds of cheese. Another way to look at this, in one of the plazas of the capital's upscale Chaco district, there's a gentleman who recently was selling snow cones for about 2,000 bolivars each, or 2 for $1.
Right.
So 2,000 in Venezuelan currency.
About 50 cents.
For 1 snow cone, or 1 United States dollar will get you 2 snow cones. So the ratio is $1 to 4,000 bolivars. Yes. He goes on to explain that some days half of his sales are in dollars. He's a former paratrooper who quit the military to make ends meet. Selling snow cones, he makes in 3 days what his wife, who is a municipal worker, earns in a month. Quote, "I've trained as a sniper and expert in explosives. What good does it do you? 0, he said.
It depends on which side you're on. I'm sure the people who want to overthrow the government might be able to use him.
Yeah.
But no, that is sad that you don't have, that your employable skills are to make snow cones, but you can make snow cones and sell it to the people who have money and make more money than your wife, who is a professional.
Yeah. Well, and obviously this gentleman who was, but I can make more money doing this way. So, and I want the dollar, not the bolivar, because.
Well, and it's like the gentleman or the lady who was quoted in the article, when they went to the grocery store, the store would accept American dollars, but they wouldn't give you any change. So if you had a $20 bill, it behooved you to pick up $20 worth of groceries, because the dollar is so valuable that they weren't giving you change. If you bought $10 worth of goods or whatever, and you had a $20 bill, they weren't going to give you $10 back. So you might as well just go get $20 worth of goods. That shows you how much the dollar is valued right now in Venezuela as a currency.
The richest 10% of households, Lance, in Venezuela now receive more than 60% of Venezuela's total income. So the top 10% are getting 60%.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I guess I don't know how else to emphasize the problem for people. Hopefully we've communicated that things are pretty bad in Venezuela right now. They're not good.
And where the U.S. came out and supported the coalition government to overthrow the dictator and everything else, now all this is coming about and all these things are occurring, and at least we're not hearing from our State Department to do a whole lot. We're not doing anything. We're not hearing that we're doing anything. Maybe we are, but we're really not reading about anything or finding any information out of what our government is doing at this point. It was like, yeah, get rid of this dictator. This will be a good thing. And then have we been hands off, or are we doing things quietly behind the scenes? Are we supporting? There's not a lot of information out there after the initial excitement of an overthrow of the government taking place.
The most recent information, we hinted Russia's involvement in the introduction to the show today. The most recent information comes in regards to that, and it's as of yesterday. 2 Russian planes carrying soldiers actually just landed in Caracas in a show of support for Venezuela's illegitimate president, Mr. Maduro, drawing a rebuke from Washington on Monday as the authoritarian leader defied U.S. efforts to oust him. This is Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Quote, U.S. and regional countries will not stand idly by as Russia exacerbates tensions in Venezuela. He goes on to say, the insertion of Russian military personnel risks prolonging the suffering of the Venezuelan people, the statement said, calling on Moscow to cease its unconstructive behavior. Russia's defense minister didn't respond to a request to comment from the Wall Street Journal. Venezuela's information ministry also declined to comment. It's interesting, though, right? Because it says, will not stand idly by, but doesn't say what not standing idly by means, just that we won't do it. But that's what we're doing as of right now, right?
Right.
I mean, in fairness, we have attempted to send vast amounts of humanitarian aid, some of which was turned away at the border. We have also placed and continue to have in place pretty harsh sanctions, which is part of, for what it's worth, some of the irony here is our squeezing of their economy and inflation, which is actually increasing the value of our dollar in their country. So there have been some, and one of the articles touches on this, some who are supportive of the Maduro administration who are saying this is just all a U.S. ploy to benefit their own interests, to increase the value of the dollar, to, to transform the Venezuelan economy into an American subsidiary, crazy stuff.
Well, I don't know if it's crazy, but at least we're trying to do something.
Right. I mean, is that happening? I mean, sure, as a result of this, the US dollar is replacing their own currency, but it's not our fault that the problems with the currency began, put it that way. Are we maybe inadvertently making it worse? Sure. But it's not, I don't think it's because we intentionally want to make it worse.
But where does it go from here? I mean, obviously.
What's history tell us?
The Russians are going to come in and stabilize the sitting dictatorship and turn everything over to the government.
Okay.
And
it's kind of like a Cuba situation.
Calm the situation into their favor. Yes. So that they can keep the flow of oil coming from Venezuela that they need or want.
So,
it's one thing, so the Russians are in Syria, and that was one issue, but now they're over here on our side of the world.
So if
that's really old school for you youngsters out there to say their side and our side. That's Cold War talk.
Yeah.
But we're letting them into this hemisphere now?
Again.
I
mean, just right. Let's keep perspective. They've been here before. They like to hang out on this side every now and then. They can't necessarily have Cuba back. So
I keep fighting the urge to say that Trump wants to build a hotel down there, but we'll see. Maybe if Putin gets control of it, they'll give Donald Trump some land in Venezuela.
It'd need to be a hotel for the top 10% because
that's all he's interested in.
Everybody else won't be much good.
The tax break he gave was for the top 10%, and he's trying to take out.
No. I won't let you get away with that.
He's trying to take the health care away from the average people. So.
The Department of Treasury reported that for around 60% of taxpayers, which yes includes some of the top percent, that the tax break was an overall benefit, not an overall hindrance. I don't happen to be in that percentage, and I don't think Lance does either.
Oh, no, I'm not in that percentage.
But in fairness, it wasn't just the top percent that benefited.
Okay.
Now, you could argue that it'll be bad for us in the long run.
They benefited the most.
Okay. You just can't make those blanket statements.
I can.
Well, you can, but I won't let you just make it without making sure we're correct. We haven't had any ethics complaints in a long time, right? So we got to keep up. Speaking of ethics,
that's
Lance,
because you won't let me talk about the president. You take him off the plate every day.
Is that what
we
we
want to do the show? Right.
You seem to get him in anyway.
I try.
Well, things like this, I mean, regardless of who the president is.
I remember him coming out and supporting the new government, and we were going to support it, and we were going to make sure they came into power, and we were going to do all kinds of good things. And now we read this, and the Secretary of State comes out and says, we're not going to let the Russians in there. Okay. What else?
Right.
Because
saying it doesn't do anything.
You haven't carried through, just like everything else with this president. He hasn't carried through on what he said he was going to do. Whether you like what he says he's going to do or not, will you at least let me say that he doesn't carry through with it other than his Supreme Court justices?
Right. Many of his campaign promises, either he did something directly in opposition to them or has not delivered.
Or the things that he tweets or the things that he comes out and says on Monday are really important. 2 weeks later, he doesn't even remember saying it.
The two things that we have, right, that are substantive things that he said would happen that happened are the Supreme Court thing, the Supreme Court justice, and the tax break. And that's the extent of it. Because the wall's not happening, still not happening.
Right.
And there's, a laundry list of other things.
Farmers aren't doing well.
And in this case, it's Venezuela, right? We said that we support the legitimate leader who is not Mr. Maduro. And that's nice, right? I mean, I guess it's nice that we said it. And I remember saying, whatever this was 2 months ago when that statement came out, this is the right first step. And it is. But it can't just be we support him.
Can't be the only step.
Right. It can't be the only step. Like I said, the whole nature of a first step implies that there will be other steps.
Oh, I don't think this president got that memo.
Okay.
Nobody tweeted. Nobody at Fox News told him that.
Oh, is that what happened?
Yeah.
Okay. Nobody.
Just take the first step, Mr. President. Just take the first step.
That's right.
Okay.
It didn't get relayed.
He takes a lot of good first steps, I guess.
Well, don't they say the first step's the most important?
I don't know. I've never said that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us, Lance, I was saying before,
yes.
Speaking of ethics, keeping Lance ethical and stuff, we're trying to accomplish a mission as a network. And what is that?
Well, our mission here at TrueChat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
I think you've almost got it memorized.
I don't want that to get out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's been about a year since we put the poster up, right? No, not quite that long.
Yeah, but then we go to 2 days a week. I may start losing it again.
8 months? Okay. That might cause some memory loss. If you think that we're not upholding our mission, ethics@truechat.org, you send an email to ethics@truechat.org. And if you just want to engage, tell Lance and I that we're completely off base and here's all this great stuff we're doing in Venezuela, we encourage you to do that. Or, of course, if you think Lance is the smartest man you've ever met, you can let us know that as well on Twitter, on Facebook, at TrueChat.org, at TrueChat.org, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media. So please do reach out. Let us know your thoughts. Lance, we've definitely outlined the problem.
Okay.
Would you say that there's any dispute that things are bad in Venezuela?
I'm not sure too many people would argue that things are not bad in Venezuela.
Okay. And you definitely wouldn't contest.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
Yes, I would agree with that statement that things seem to be on a downward trend.
So part of what we try to do on The State of Us, there's, I think, 3 big things, right? Either draw attention to things that aren't getting enough attention, which this fits under, or bring a different perspective to things already receiving attention. And the last thing would be to propose not only to present problems, but demonstrate that there are potential solutions to problems. We're not saying, keep in mind when we present solutions, because I had somebody that I was talking to about this the other day, it's not that we're saying this is what has to be done or this is the only way to do it. All we're trying to show people is that a lot of what we have, especially in cable news, is mostly the problem, the problem, the problem, the problem, the problem, and on and on and on and on, and never very much discussion about what we could actually do about it. Again, doesn't mean we have to come to a specific conclusion, but we at least need to discuss what are some practical things that we could ask our lawmakers to start to look into. So that's now what we want to talk about is, at the moment, we're really not doing much. Like we said, economic sanctions, humanitarian aid. And we do that for lots of people. And it's not, again, not to downplay the value of that because it's important stuff, especially the humanitarian aid, but it's not enough in this case, obviously, because things just continue to deteriorate. So what do we do, Lance? I mean, is there short of a military invasion, is there anything else other than that we could actually do? Because that's pretty much, I mean, granted, it's only 100 Russian soldiers, but they're taking the first steps, right? Mm-hmm. They're taking first steps of small scale, boots on the ground kind of thing. Is there an alternative to us having to just follow suit and put 200 people there.
Oh, sure. Tell them to get out because they're not as strong as us.
So what's the consequence if they don't?
Well, I don't know. How do you tell your best friend that you have to get out, that you can't be there?
Oh,
I'm really at a loss here.
yeah.
Because there is a way to play this, but we have not played hardball with Russia under the current administration. And that's what the Russians historically respond to. That's what gets their attention. And we don't do that. And so we're seeing the ramifications of such in that, well, if we can go in and we can do what we want in Syria and you're really not going to tell us what to do, well, we're going to start doing, if we can do stuff in Uzbekistan and you're really not going to tell us what to do, and we can do stuff in China and you're really not going to tell us what to do.
It's no different.
This is just another step in the president's policy of trying to get along with Russia. I mean, we just had the Mueller report. And I'm really not trying to bring the other stuff into it, but it does. We just had the Mueller report with the briefing telling us that whether the president was involved or not, the Russians played a big role in our 2016 election. And odds are they're going to play an even bigger role in the 2020 election. Okay, that comes out. And then within a couple of days, the Russians now have military personnel in Venezuela. I think there's a connection there. And our president and our current administration is not putting a stop to this. And so this is the way the Russians play ball.
So the next step would be to start playing hardball again with the Russians. I mean, basically to draw the line in the sand and say, if you don't get these people out of here, X, Y, and Z will happen. Whether that's sanctions.
We're going to throw you out of Syria. We're going to
something.
sanction you. We're going to cut off your oil supply from the Arabs because the Arabs like us a whole lot more than you. We'll get the Saudis to cut off your oil supply, and then let's see what you can do, because Venezuela can't produce enough oil for the Russians.
Okay.
And what they need to do. So, I mean, you've got to start playing that kind of
That's
economic,
the next step.
If you don't want to send troops in.
Right.
Okay. And make Venezuela into another Syria.
But that is an option.
But that is where it's going. That is an option.
Right. Now,
I think what you do though is you make it very difficult for the Russians, for Putin to get oil.
Here's my impression of Syria, and you tell me if yours is different, okay? I think part of the mistake, perhaps, that we made militarily there is, and in fairness, the Middle East is certainly a different conundrum than in many respects, it's a very different situation than what we're facing in Venezuela, because we're not necessarily talking about obscure terrorist cells that are hard to locate and difficult to find and, weapons of mass destruction that don't exist. It's not quite the same, but in using it as a potential example, part of what I think I've observed the problem is we said we're going to put some troops and military personnel in Syria, right? I think we kind of got a cold feet thing from our involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we, generally speaking, came with a relatively strong force that did not result in a swift victory. But again, this is where we have to be careful not to oversimplify, because the challenges we faced in Afghanistan and Iraq were not the kind of thing that a massive military presence can solve immediately, where I think, from, again, not being a military expert, right, not being a strategist or a general or anything like that, it seems to me in Venezuela or in Syria, where you have a corrupt regime that needs ousted, where the people are obviously on the side of not the current administration, and would welcome United States assistance, showing up with an incredibly strong force in a place like Syria or Venezuela would have resulted in what we were typically more used to, which was a swift and decisive victory.
Well, to have a victory, you have to have a desired outcome.
Sure. The desired outcome being ousting the illegitimate Mr. Maduro and installing.
But we haven't said that. So what is our end game? Before you can, that's my point though, is with what you're saying. Okay. If that's what we want our end game to be, but we haven't made the statement that that's what we want our end game to be. So we need to decide what will determine victory before we can go about doing something. To do something and then figure out what victory is why we became so disenchanted in the Middle East.
There wasn't a clear goal and thereby no longer
there was
clear way to achieve
there
it.
was, and President Bush 1 achieved it and then came back home and then took abuse because, the people are still in existence. Okay, but he went over saying, this is what we're going to accomplish. We're going to get the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and he did.
Right.
And as soon as he did, he brought everybody back home. We should have been celebrating. That was fine for everybody. Well, then stuff started happening again. It's like, okay, that wasn't our goal.
Right.
He achieved the goal. So what is the goal of the United States when it comes to Venezuela? And then I think I can tell you much clearer what I think should be done. What should be our, I guess that's where I've got to come back.
I think that should be our goal. I mean, step one is because, meddling in the currency stuff, put it this way, I think.
My goal is to get the Russians out.
Okay.
I don't want to play.
I think getting the Russians out is a means to an end. And I think the end should be, making sure that the will of the people of Venezuela is followed. And their will was that Juan Guaido become the next president of Venezuela, not Mr. Maduro.
Let them do it.
So,
see, my take is let them do it.
Okay. But in other words, if our goal is that Juan Guaido take over and assume full control of the government, if that's the goal, I think part of achieving that goal solves what you're after, which is we have to get the Russians out. Because as long as the Russians are there, they're going to try to subvert those efforts because Guaido is probably not going to be buddy-buddy with the Russians.
No, I totally agree with you, but I wouldn't go that far as my goal. My goal would be just to get the Russians out.
And I don't know. I don't think
and then let the people of Venezuela.
It.
So you want the U.S. to be a fixer?
I think if the Venezuelans want our help to shore up their democracy. It's different when we go someplace and we're not asked to be there, right?
But that's Cold War mentality because I'm sure I can walk down to Venezuela and I can find 2 or 3 people who want the United States to be there.
Yeah.
That's too simple. Who wants us to be there? How many people want us to be there?
Fair.
Okay. And it's like, because that was what we always said during the Cold War. Well, there are people in this country that want the United States, and we'd show them on TV and we'd quote them in the newspapers. Okay, but they weren't necessarily people. I mean, that's been the U.S. propaganda tool since we dealt with the Native Americans, with the Indians and pushed them off their land. Well, we've got people who signed this treaty. Well, they don't represent us. So you can't just, and I'm not saying that you're doing it because I know what you're trying to say, but that I've heard that from American president after American president after American president. Well, there are people there that want us. Okay. Are they people that we want to support? Because time after time after time, we supported ruthless dictators just because they wanted us there and we wanted our dictator in power rather than the dictator that was in power. And it got us during the Cold War, got us into a lot of sticky situations, which is why I'm not so sure that I want to be a part of government building in Venezuela. I do know that I want the Russians out of there. I don't want the Russians messing around in the Western Hemisphere, but I didn't want the Russians messing around in Syria either, but we never got them out of Syria. And I believe we need to stand up and make a stronger power play to the Russians because they are becoming stronger, but they're not strong yet. And so they will back down, especially if we cut off their oil supply. But again, so our goals differ.
As we established, yeah, I understand. As we established, though, when the U.S. isn't somewhere, Russia has a tendency to show up, kind of regardless of whether or not we're okay with them being there. I mean, we've sanctioned them before, especially in recent years. Obama administration was relatively aggressive with sanctions. And it didn't make a big difference in Syria. The only thing that kept them from really taking over was that we maintained a presence in Syria as well. I I understand. I appreciate the parallels that this situation draws to some of how we behaved in the Cold War. At the same time, though, I think that us saying we're going to go to make sure this leader is installed doesn't have to be what it's been in the past, which is we're going to do that and we're going to stay and we're going to shape the government in the image that we want. It can be that. I'm not saying it can't be. All I'm saying, I guess, is that there is something in between a military presence that lasts for 15 plus years and is working to build the government that we want versus a military presence to oust an illegitimate dictator and allow the legitimate dictator to take over and then for us to withdraw. In other words, a Bush-esque, we have a very specific reason that we're going. Once that reason's accomplished, we're leaving, and hopefully they can sort it out from there. In other words, don't get involved in trying to sort out their currency problem. Don't get involved in trying to reshape the government to avoid illegitimate leaders again. Just get the person who should be in office, make sure they have control, and then let them do it however they want to do it, which again is nice, assuming that there's not too much opposition to his leadership and that he could actually maintain control over the military, which
but won't you admit that in a perfect world that would be nice, but that's not the way it's going to play out if we get involved.
No, it probably plays out with another long-term investment, another long-term deployment of American troops to stabilize another country. But as we've highlighted, I've talked before about, I think what we do with countries like this, right? Iraq, Afghanistan, perhaps Venezuela, it's our modern form of colonization without calling it that. Is it not? That's what we do. And because the alternative is we've discovered the whole world, all pieces of land are spoken for, and now it's really just about who has the most control. And when we're faced with Russia's going to assume control in one area, or China, our typical response is, no, we're going to control it instead. As opposed to some of what we did in the past, which was just try to create a standoff and nobody control it. It seems now that our motto for the past 10 or 15 years has been somebody has to control it, and if it's not going to be them, then it's got to be us, because otherwise it's going to be them, kind of thing. Not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's my observation of why I'm not sure that just getting Russia out will actually help the people of Venezuela. I'm sure it will. Will it help them enough?
Whether it does or not, it's not our business. That's why my goal is very limited, not to spend money and to get U.S. troops involved into another situation, get bogged down in there, is we can play the sanctions game and do some other things and get the Russians out of there and then let the people of Venezuela work through their own problems themselves.
Okay.
So that's where I understand what you're saying. I'm just cordially agreeing to disagree with what our goal should be.
I don't know. I have to think about it more. Hopefully we've given our listeners something to think about, but this is why.
We've definitely given them something to listen about because we have two different solutions.
Right.
Mine is not anything like yours, and yours includes mine. I mean, you want to go further.
Yes.
But I don't.
Well, and that's why I'm saying, I guess I don't want to say, I don't mean to imply. I'm not opposed to Lance's solution, nor am I saying that I think, because again, I believe there are people far more qualified than myself to make an assessment about whether or not military intervention is really a viable solution. Again, at a glance, based on how we've behaved in other areas, I think that it's certainly a possibility that we should be discussing, but the whole reason that Lance and I have this conversation is because other people are not having this conversation. So we don't even know from an expert standpoint what really makes the most sense. You're just having to get what Lance and I can come up with what very limited information is available about the situation. And the reason that the media has to take time to talk about this stuff is because we need them to do the legwork, to get the experts on, the people who study this kind of stuff, to tell us this is what is most likely to achieve this end goal. You know, say, here's 3 end goals that we could go for, and these are the ways that we achieve those end goals. And then we can make a better decision about what is the best option. But we can't do that as long as we're stuck with what we're stuck with at the moment, which is, 50 nations, including the United States, who have said, we recognize Juan Guaido. And that's it. I think hopefully we can all agree, everybody listening, that can't be it. We might as well not even have said it if we're not doing anything other than that. Whether it's ousting the Russians, whether it's invading, whether it's sanctions, there's got to be more. So let us know your thoughts at TrueChat.org, Facebook, Twitter, social media. Lance, we're telling people, right? They got to bring at least one new listener. You've brought us, 3 or 4, right? This year.
Yep.
And when you're telling people about the ways they can listen, what do you share with them?
Well, I tell them go to TrueChat because that's how I do it.
Okay, you go to TrueChat.
Those of you out there that are much more technologically advanced than I am, you can use Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, or any other way that you listen to find podcasts such as ours.
Okay, excellent. You switched up our order a little bit. Spotify usually leads, though. You switch Apple Podcasts and Stitcher, but Spotify is your favorite, I think, even though you don't use Spotify.
Don't even know what it is.
Oh, okay.
But I know we're on it.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you all very much for tuning in. For the State of Us on TrueChat, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
We'll see you next time. Be the change.